public enemy number one is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive.
Thank you, you're too nice. Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Jan Fran. For those of you who don't know me, I host a show called The Feed on SBS. Thank you, our entire television audience is here. We have much higher views online, just FYI. If you have never heard of The Feed, don't feel bad. My grandma still thinks it's a food show on ABC. It is so great to see this iconic building in Sydney packed with all of you here today. Wow, can I just say, give yourself a round of applause for simply turning up. Also, does no one have a full-time job? What's going on? Like I said, it's so great to see so many of you here in person, but also shout out to those watching on Facebook Live at the moment. I'd love to welcome a number of special guests here this morning, leadership and congregation members from the Uniting Church, the team at Uniting who put this massive event together and I'm told lost several thousand strands of hair in the process. Welcome to the team from Virgin. I'm definitely going to hit them up for some cheapo flights to Bali after this. And to those from the sector and partner organisations as well. It's so good, didn't think I'd be saying this, it's so good to see so many politicians here. Just quietly, 2,000 people chucked a sickie today, so just to be here, it's obviously an issue that they care very deeply about. I am so pleased to be here to help launch the Fair Treatment campaign, which in a nutshell is about treating drug use as a health and social issue rather than a criminal one. I spent some time in Portugal earlier this year where I worked on a documentary about the country's decriminalisation policy, and I certainly think that there are some lessons that Australia can learn about the way in which Portugal has embraced drug reform. Normally, I'm up here telling people to switch off their mobile phones. I'm not going to be doing that. We want you to keep your mobile phones on, and we'd love you to follow the event on social media. Open up Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, LinkedIn, whatever you're into, we'll be there. This morning, you are going to see and hear stories from 3 women whose lives have been affected by drug policy. We also have an excellent panel for you this morning, which I'm so excited to get into. But before we get underway, please welcome Auntie Anne Weldon to the stage to give us a welcome to country.
Sorry everyone, I'm Michael West from Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council. Auntie Anne is not well, and I'm replacing her today, and it's a great privilege here this morning. Wherever you've been in Australia, there's been a Blackfoot there for tens of thousands of years. Aboriginal people have lived on this continent more than 65,000 years. We have great wisdom and great knowledge. When you think about it, we believe that Australians have a responsibility to look after our culture and our sites, not only for Australians, but for the world, humanity. There is only one race on planet Earth, and that's reinforced in this message stick: one mob, one tribe, humanity, and we must respect each other. The rain falls from heavens, lands on Mother Earth, finds its ways to the rivers and to the oceans. The Hawkesbury, Nepean, Georges, Pacific are the aquatic boundaries of your nation. To any of my Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters out there, we warmly welcome you from the land, the clan, the tribe, the nation you come from, and to all our brothers and sisters, and we are all brothers and sisters, we belong to that one mob, one tribe humanity. We warmly welcome you from the land, community, neighbourhood, family, and the country you come from around this little planet we call Earth that we share as humans. And we have more in common than we have our differences, but our diversity of this nation is a great strength, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. In this times of fake news and alternative facts, let's all work together and look for the truth and look for facts to deal and base our decisions on. So on behalf of Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, enjoy today, have a safe journey home to your family and loved ones, and let's all work for a better world. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Welcome to country. I'd now like to invite the Reverend Simon Hansford, moderator of the Uniting Church of New South Wales and the ACT.
Good morning and welcome. It's a sign of great hope to see more than 2,000 people packed into this beautiful venue this morning. A clear sign that the general public cares passionately about this issue. I'm delighted to welcome Sir Richard Branson and the Global Commission on Drug Policy to Sydney this morning to help us launch this fair treatment campaign. In 2016, the Uniting Church, in our synod in this state, New South Wales and the ACT, passed 2 resolutions to campaign actively and publicly on this issue, to provide a greater emphasis on treatment for those battling with substance dependency, and to decriminalise all drugs in small quantities across New South Wales and the ACT. In other words, the Synod, the Church, asked us to view drug use as a health and social issue rather than a criminal one, and to advocate that our policymakers do the same. Around the world, 24 countries have already started to embark on this journey, a number that is rising fast. So, why is the Uniting Church involved in reforming drug policy? It's because our faith in Jesus Christ compels us to offer hope and life for everybody in our society, especially serving those who are marginalised or disadvantaged, who are often those most affected by drug policy. So this morning, we launched the Fair Treatment campaign. This campaign is being spearheaded by the Uniting Church and our service arm Uniting, and is backed by 55 partner organisations in Australia, including the Law Society of New South Wales, the New South Wales Bar Association, and the New South Wales branch of the Health Services Union. Every year, 200,000 Australians are currently refused treatment for addiction. That means we are turning away more than half the people who need it most. The Fair Treatment campaign is asking for better outcomes for those people and asking our policymakers to announce a People's Treatment Summit, bringing together the greatest minds from the sector with those who have lived experience to help Australia lead the world in breaking addiction, in treating addiction. In a week's time, we'll undertake a pilgrimage from Dubbo to Sydney, creating a documentary and gathering support for the campaign. I encourage you all to sign up and show your support at the end of today's program. This morning, we're going to find out why this issue is so important from some of the top experts in the global field, and on behalf of the Uniting Church, I'm delighted to welcome you all to this important event.
Thank you, Reverend Hansford. And without further ado, let me introduce our 3 panel members for this morning. We have Dr. Marianne Jauncey from the Uniting Medically Supervised Injecting Centre. We have the General Secretary of the Global Commission on Drug Policy, Dr. Khalid Tinasti. And we have someone called Richard. Sir Richard Branson is here. Of course, he's the Virgin Group founder. Here he is. Please welcome our panellists. All right. Let's get started. There are so many questions. There's so little time. I think my first one is going to go to Richard. This is going to sound like a weird question, Richard, but what are you doing here?
What am I doing here? I've been involved in something called the Global Drug Commission for about 10 years now. And the Global Drug Commission has 16 ex-presidents on it from around the world. And I'm the sort of the one entrepreneur on the commission as well. All these ex-presidents realized that when they were in office, they weren't brave enough to do the right thing for drug policy. The war on drugs is a political sort of winner. You thump the table and you talk about the war on drugs, and they just weren't brave enough to stand up to that. So they formed the Global Drug Commission to try to make amends, in a sense, for not doing the right thing when they were in office. The war on drugs has been going on now for nearly 60 years. As an entrepreneur and a businessman, if something had failed so abysmally, we would have closed it down 59 years ago. But sadly, politicians have just continued to wage this war. It's been an abject failure. It's caused untold misery around the world. People have been executed, people have been locked up, people who have drug problems, instead of being helped, they've been thrown into prison. They've died from their drug problems. And drugs, can be an illness for some people, and they need to be helped. So the Global Drug Commission has looked at what is working around the world, and they've also encouraged countries and states to change their approach.
Well, we'll get to the Global Drug Commission in a second, but I just want to ask you very quickly before I move on to these guys. Was there a moment for you where you decided that you wanted to get involved in this campaign for drug reform? Was there a particular incident or a particular moment where you're like, got to do it?
I had a record label, many years ago.
Is there anything you don't do, just quietly?
I'm actually getting a Hollywood star on Tuesday, so I'm quite excited about that for my record. But one of the artists we had was Boy George and Culture Club, just when he'd started off in business, and he was a delightful young lad who used to speak out against drugs, but got a lot of money, a lot of success very quickly, and ended up on heroin. And I took him to my home in Oxford, and I took somebody there to help him, a woman called Medj Patterson. And it was going very well. The treatment was going very well. Then the press discovered he was there, and the Sun newspaper in England's headline was, arrest him, and the police turned up, and we heard the police were coming, and myself and Boy George and this little doctor, she's about 4 foot tall, George and I were crawling through the undergrowth, trying to escape across the fields to the church. She was just walking in the grass. She was still under the top of the grass. But anyway, we got to this graveyard where we had a car waiting, and we managed to get George away. But anyway, a couple of days later, they arrested him, and as a result, his treatment was broken, and he was back on heroin and in peril of his life, and a couple of other people lost their lives at his flat. And I just then thought, this is wrong. I mean, if somebody has a problem and they're willing to get help, the last thing should happen is there should be any possibility of the law getting involved. And so through, I think, those experiences.
Yeah. Marianne, you sort of started the first medically supervised injecting clinic in Sydney. Tell us a little bit about your work, what you do and why you're here.
So I've been working for 10 years now at the Medically Supervised Injecting Centre in King's Cross. When it opened, it was the first in the English-speaking world. And actually, it just makes sense. You know, when you have people dying of accidental overdose, it's really easy to stop them dying. You just need to be there. So what our centre does is allow people to come in and not only have clean injecting equipment, but have a safe space. So they inject within our premises, and instead of being behind a parked car or in an alleyway, they're next to a counsellor or a nurse. And not only are we then able to stop them dying, nearly 1.5 million visits, 8,000 overdoses, and not one death.
Yes. That's some good statistics.
But also, it's about giving people a chance at taking the next step. So we have to keep people alive, because then they don't. If we don't, they don't have a chance of anything else. But then it's about connection. And so after they've injected, they move through to the chill-out room, if you like. And that's a really important space because it's about connection.
Yeah. Khalid, you're from the Global Commission on Drug Policy. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and what the goals of the organisation are?
Yeah, of course. It is embodied here today with Richard in this room, and you can see the commitment in how the commissioners see themselves in this discussion. So the Global Commission really started when the Latin Americans and the Latin American former heads of states that were facing such a violent environment and threats on democracy, and who looked into Europe and harm reduction services and decriminalization models and tried to mix up the two to address this situation. And its first report in 2011 obviously was highlighting this issue, that the problem that we have is not only with drugs that could be risky, but most of the harms are coming from the policies that we're putting in place. And I mean, a lot of people have been saying it before for a long time, but when you have gotten that many number of former heads of states, a few high-level officials, and I mean, we've lost this year Mr. Kofi Annan, who was a member of the commission, and when you got that, it has given it a different light, be it at the national level or international level. What the commission does really is analyzing situations and giving very high-level recommendations, and those are 5. Put health first, which means harm reduction, treatment, prevention. Access to essential medicines, that's the second, which is basically not a problem here in Australia, but it is for 75% of the world. Then decriminalizing use, and the 4th is proportionality and focusing on really organized crime and stop harassing the low-level actors in the market that depend on it for their lives. And the last one, obviously, is to take responsibilities for states to regulate as much as they do for any other dangerous or any other risky behavior or goods. So that's in a nutshell what we do.
We're going to take a look at a video now. We're very fortunate to be joined by Marianne McConnell here today, but we're going to have a little bit of a watch of Marianne's story, talking to us about what happened to her son.
I'm Marianne McConnell, and I've been a member of the Uniting Church since its inception in 1977. Our son did all the things that most kids do. He did a paper run, he was good at cross-country running, he was school captain, and he liked music and all sorts of things. So he was, quite an active young man. But he was very sensitive to things, especially to happenings in the world and relationships. And as a lot of young people, I think relationships are not always that easy. One night, a friend of our son's knocked on our door and told us our son was in trouble. He was unconscious. He'd overdosed on heroin. The ambulance were there. The police also came, and they followed my son to the hospital. I thought, this is wrong. My son could be dying, and here I am being questioned by police like I'm a criminal, where I should be there holding my son's hand. They revived him. But unfortunately, the police frightened him away from the help that was there and available. He discharged himself and he came home with us that night. You could tell that he was terrified, and he took himself off and he overdosed again. He was on his own. And there was no one to call an ambulance. I think my son's death was avoidable if it had been treated then as a health issue rather than a criminal justice issue. I'm not blaming the police. I don't want anyone to ever think that I blame the police, because I don't. They were doing their job. They were doing the job that the law had told them to do, but the law was wrong. I value the social justice side of the church. Christ was out there to look after the most vulnerable in our society. He healed on the Sabbath, even though that was against the law of the day. And so sometimes our laws are wrong. And I think Christ saw that. And I think we should see that. Our son was 24 when he died. He was working full time and he had just got a degree in computer science. People have the wrong idea about people that use drugs. And I guess, you know, if you haven't experienced it like I have, you can understand, because we've been indoctrinated for so many years. These kids, you know, they're good kids, they've got potential, and we have to do all we can to keep them alive. It's wonderful that the Uniting Church has taken this issue on. There is enough suffering in our world, and when we can see where we can reduce some suffering, that's what we should be doing. The Uniting Fair Treatment campaign is taking drug use out of the criminal area and putting it into the health area. Overseas countries have shown it. They treat people like human beings. They care for them and they have the treatment there available when they need it. I'm not in favour of drug use, but we're not in favour of allowing people to die. If people with other conditions, heart conditions or so forth, were treated the same way, there'd be a big uproar. So we have to bring in policies that cause the least harm. My message to politicians would be, we've tried to save people from drugs through prohibition, but it hasn't worked, and people have died because of that. To turn around the deaths and to turn around the misery and the tragedy, we've just got to act.
That's certainly a good way to end that video, I think. Richard, you have a son of sort of similar age to Marianne's son when he passed away from a drug overdose. What goes through your mind when you watch a story like that as a parent?
What goes through my mind is simply that if politicians had a child or a brother or sister who had a drug problem, they would not want them locked up. They would want them to get the best treatment, and you know, when people are locked up, they almost always go back to taking drugs again when they come out. When people go through treatment centres, by and large, they manage to become useful members of society again, paying their taxes, contributing to society, and you know, so if we can just start treating drugs as a health problem, not a criminal problem, it's just blindingly obvious that you're going to start getting on top of the problem. And the facts are that when you look at countries that have done that, that they have got on top of the problem. If I may, I'll just give one example. I mean, Portugal in the year 2000 had a horrendous heroin problem. And a very brave president went on television and said, if you're taking heroin, you will not be criminalized, and the state is here to help you. You know, come forward, and you know, you can come and inject safely. You can be supervised, like you're doing here. And when you're ready to go to a clinic, we'll arrange for you to go to a clinic. And within 3 or 4 years, it had become a non-event in Portugal. People who'd been on heroin had been weaned off. They were useful members of society again. It's just, if it can work in Portugal, it can work in pretty well any country in the world.
Yeah. Where do you think that Marianne's son might have been if he had found your medically supervised injecting clinic? I know that's a bit of a hypothetical question, but do you think things might have turned out differently?
There's never been anybody die of an overdose in a supervised injecting facility. And when I meet and speak with people like Marianne and other people like Judy in the audience and other mums and dads, it's just blindingly obvious, like you said, that we are frightened of our children using drugs. But why are we frightened? We're frightened because they're going to be harmed. So what we need to stop is the harm. And every overdose death is a preventable death, because if you are just there and somebody is with you who knows what to do, you'll be okay. So for me, in a way, what was so kind of the essence of what Marianne was saying, and I had the privilege of being with Marianne after she'd been telling that story for over 20 years, and I think she felt like finally people were starting to listen. And we presented together to the floor of the Synod of the Uniting Church. And, people have said to me, how on earth did you get a church to kind of agree to this? But I think at the end of the day, from a faith-based organisation, it's pretty simple. You believe in the sanctity of human life and you believe in human dignity, and that's it.
Yeah. Can we give a shout out to Marianne, who was just one of the people that was instrumental behind all of this? Honestly, thank you. Khalid, where do you sort of see Australia and where does Australia sit on drug reform compared to countries around the world? Like, give us a report card. Are we an A, or are we sitting somewhere down by the Ds?
Well, I mean, it's kind of very hard to say it that way, but if we look today in that kind of polarization that is happening in the world, with some countries that are really trying to move away from prohibition, regardless of what it is, and still the prevailing paradigm of prohibition in the majority of the world, I mean, Australia still obviously supports that, and still supports prohibition, and still supports the international conventions that do legitimize the system and do not allow countries to try more. I mean, when we talk about safe injection facilities, Switzerland, the first one that opened them, had reports by the UN every year saying you are outside of the conventions, you are outside of the conventions. Today it is recognized as a medical intervention that is very cost-effective and effective. Nevertheless, I mean, to say that Australia is still there, still in the prohibition paradigm and defending it, Australia is doing quite some good work at the international level as well. If we think about the Human Rights Council, for instance, it has supported and sponsored resolutions to call upon the end of human rights violations and drug control. For instance, it also does some efforts to fund access to essential medicines in sub-Saharan Africa. So there are some ways to try to mitigate this position, but nevertheless, it remains obviously on the prohibition side globally.
Okay.
And one thing that the Global Commission has suggested to countries and to states in America and other places for the last 10 years is experiment with different approaches, and let's see if they work. And the Obama administration did experiment with different approaches. So in some states, maybe 30 or 40, medical marijuana has been legalized. In some states, cannabis has been completely legalized. And so now, after a few years, we're able to look at these situations and see, has it had a dramatically worrying effect? And in fact, what it has shown is that the states that are selling medical marijuana is helping an awful lot of people for an awful lot of problems. In the states where it's been legalized, the amount of people who are taking marijuana has not increased. It's been completely steady. But instead of the money from the sale of that marijuana going into the underworld and being used for all sorts of nefarious reasons, it's going back into the state. So it's being used for education, it's being used for health, it's being used for drug rehabilitation centers, it's being used for alcohol centers. And it's working. So I think the Commission has realised, having seen these experiments around the world, that deregulating, regulating drugs and letting the state be in charge of it is far safer than letting the underworld do it. Ecstasy, I mean, kids who die from ecstasy tablets at concerts, invariably it's laced with something else. In Holland, they have the sensible position where they test an ecstasy tablet.
Pill testing at festivals, that's certainly something that Australia is discussing as well, I think, now. So with the Commission, we'd just like to see more places experimenting with different approaches so we can actually make a decision. But so far, the states and the countries that have tested a new approach, we feel it's working.
Yeah, because one of the things is, that you said, I think there's the concern that if we remove criminal sanctions, suddenly we'll send a message that drug use is okay. But actually, as you say, when you look at what's happened in places, people don't suddenly take up heroin use and become drug users. And actually what we know is within Australia, 43% of people admit to using illicit drugs. That's those of you that admit it.
Admit is the key word there.
So basically, we're talking about, at least 50%, probably the majority of this room, that's tried illicit drugs. That's 1 in 2. So I don't know, looking from either side of you. We're not...
You got a spliff?
We're not talking about a problem that belongs to them. We're talking about a problem that belongs to us.
Okay, we're going to...
90% of people who take drugs do it like 90% of people who take alcohol. They can smoke a spliff and manage it without getting addicted to it. There are people with alcohol or people who smoke cigarettes in excess or people who take marijuana in excess that have problems. But they're there anyway. So if you can regulate and actually warn people of the dangers of drugs, we believe that's a much more sensible way to go.
Yeah. We're going to take a look at a video now. We saw in Marianne's story what happens when the response to drugs is criminal. We've got a video for you now that shows what happens when the response to drugs is seen from a health perspective. So let's hear Liz Gale's story.
My name's Liz Gale. I'm a person in long-term recovery from addiction and I've been in recovery for over 8 years now. I don't think any child sits there and says, when I grow up, I want to stick needles in my arms and I want to live on the streets and I want to live the life that I've led. When I was a kid, I wanted to either be a teacher or I wanted to save all of the starving kids in Africa. I wasn't sure how I was going to do that, but that was one of my plans. I do think that we were quite a normal family, though when my parents got divorced, I found that a huge challenge. I think in primary school, I started to notice that feeling of being a little bit separate. I would spend a lot of time reading books. It was a way of disassociating with how I felt. At 15, I got drunk one night. I stayed with a friend. Then the next night, I slept in Plumpton Park. It was a bit scary. I was all alone in the cold on this table. There were lots of other nights like that to come. I started staying in squats, someone's car, youth refuges, on the street. It makes absolutely no sense. I could have gone and stayed with any family member, but I guess I just wanted to be separate from myself. The first time I took heroin, I felt like I wasn't me, and that was a really nice thing. I didn't want to feel like me because I felt at the core of myself I wasn't good enough. I just wanted someone to love me. At 16, I got into my first abusive relationship. Then at 18, I met this guy in King's Cross at the Fountain. That relationship turned violent within the first month, and that's what I thought I was worth. I know that whether drugs were legal or illegal, I was taking them. I did overdose at United's medically supervised injecting centre. Nobody judged me. All of the staff had compassion. Just really, I guess, really met me where I was at. I don't think I ever walked in there thinking, oh, they might save my life today, but thank God they did. I fell pregnant at 19. This little boy that I loved so much, and I left the hospital, and on the way home I stopped at Cash Stop to get a loan so that I could use, because I didn't know how not to. When he turned 3, he went to live with my mother. When she came to ask me if she could take him, I knew it was the right thing to do. Once my son was gone, I just used more and more and more, because how do you cope? Like, as a mother who can't look after her child, and you look at society's views on addiction, and you look at society's views on those junkies who choose to use. And I thought that of myself. I had points throughout my using where I thought I was a putrid gutter junkie. I didn't have an understanding of addiction, and I didn't have an understanding that I was actually unwell and I needed treatment. I have a lot of friends who have passed away. One friend who was a gorgeous young woman around my age died, overdosed while she was on a waiting list for a treatment centre. And I don't understand that. It's like the starving kids in Africa. I don't understand it. It makes no sense. This country has so much money, and yet a young woman with children who suffers from addiction dies while waiting for treatment. My friends are dying. Those junkies on the street are somebody's mother and somebody's child and somebody's father and brother and sister, and they're out there and they're dying, and they don't need to be. I remember a Christmas Day, and I couldn't ring my son because he was going to say, "Mum, are you coming to see me for Christmas?" And I couldn't get on the train and go there because I just had to keep using. I went to the phone box a few times. I rang the dealer every single time. I don't think I even got close to making that call. As I mixed up the drugs, I sat there and I cried, and as I injected myself, I sat there and I cried. I hated myself so much. And somewhere in there, I somehow had a moment where I realised I was going to die in a gutter, and one day my son would know that. And I got a bed in a women and children's program. It's one of the only ones of its kind in this country, which is absolutely crazy. It took me months to get into that treatment centre, and I had to ring every single week. While I was in there, I got hope for the first time in my life. A typical day for me at the moment is trying to drag my 14-year-old son out of a bed that's in my home, and getting my daughter, who is 2.5, up and out of bed and breakfast. I'm not where I want to be. There's always work to be done with anyone, but I can look in the mirror and go, I'm okay today. My hopes and dreams for the future are very much not for myself personally. Honestly, if there was treatment centres for everyone who needed it, I would be the happiest person in the world.
Richard, Liz's story is proof there that treatment does work, but I think the question is, how do we make treatment available? If there was one thing that you could say to our politicians, and some of them are here, what would it be? What would you say to them?
Well, I think the video said it all. here's this delightful, wonderful lady who I had the pleasure of meeting myself with children, who, once she actually managed to finally get into a treatment centre, she was able to come back, be a mother, look after her children. She's now starting a business, and she's a wonderfully useful member of society again. Good on her.
Yeah. You actually visited, because this is such a human sort of story. There are human beings behind every story that we see. You visited Marianne's a clinic, and tell us what happened when you visited.
Okay, well, I think it was quite funny, actually, in one sense. Her clinic is just magnificent, and anyone who, not everybody at once, but anybody who has time to pop in and see it should. And the work they do is just incredible. But anyway, I went in, and there was this young girl who was shooting up, and she turned around, and she saw me, and she went, "Fuck," she said. What the fuck was in that stuff? I thought, I was I'm sure I saw Richard Branson. Anyway.
I'd like to say we did let people know ahead of Richard Branson coming in, and there was no flies on any of them. One of them turned around and said, "Well, if he gets to come into our room, do we get to go into his rocket and get a free trip?"
They get high anyway without having to go into a rocket.
Marianne, what was your sort of reaction to Liz's story? Yeah.
So I've had the privilege of getting to know Liz, and you mentioned that she is now running a business. She's a makeup consultant, and we'll see how good her mascara is, because she did my makeup this morning and it's probably going to run. I guess, Liz is living proof that, we just have to try a bit harder. Half of the people in this country that are trying to get into treatment can't. They can't because there's not the spaces available. They can't because there's not the beds available. They have to ring up every day for a series of weeks. When they finally get into a detox bed, then they leave again and have to wait another 6 weeks before they can get into a rehab bed. We try and get people onto medicines, onto pharmacotherapies, and there's a waiting list for that too. If you find that moment in somebody's long, difficult life where they're ready and able to seek treatment, as a society, I don't think it's too much to ask for us to be able to provide that. As Liz, as you said, we're a rich country, and so that's why the Fair Treatment campaign is about treating people fairly under the law, but it's also about access to fair treatment, because treatment works. There's not enough. We need more.
Yeah.
Almost all the money goes into drug enforcement. If that money could go into treatment centres, you wouldn't need drug enforcement. So if the government could just take a big chunk of that.
So moving money around rather than an added burden to the taxpayer, which a lot of people might think would be the case if you were going to treat 200,000 people for a drug addiction. What would you say to someone who's concerned about the added burden to the taxpayer that this might bring?
So difficult to hear on this stage. Sorry, say it again.
What would you say to someone who thinks that there might be an added burden on the taxpayer if we were to treat people for drug addiction?
Imagine the burden on the taxpayer putting people into prison. I mean, it costs an enormous amount to have somebody in prison. And an awful lot of people with drug problems end up in prison. Use the money that you would otherwise put to put people into prison into rehabilitating them and bringing them back into society. The sooner you can get people back into society, running their own businesses and paying taxes and looking after themselves, and not having to to go into needle exchanges and other places, the better.
Yeah. We know that for every $1 you spend on treatment, you save at least 7. It's cost effective, it makes economic sense. It's basic human kindness, but it also makes good scientific sense and economic sense.
Okay. It's interesting, the point that you mentioned earlier about it being really difficult to access treatment. We've got one more video that we'd love to share with you today. It's Chantel Irwin's story. I'm going to let the video do the explaining, so let's have a watch.
I'm Chantel Marie Irwin, and I'm with the Uniting Brighter Futures program. Brighter Futures has helped me realise that there's more to life than drugs. It just makes you feel like a better person, that there's help out there for people like me. I got picked on at school. I was equalled out, alone. It made me feel sad that I was worthless. I wanted to be a dancer. When I'm dancing, it makes me feel pretty amazing. No stresses, nothing. It's just you and that's it. I had Dad come and go all the time. He made me choose between my mum and him, so I chose Mum, and he never spoke to me again. He's got issues, like we all do. I left home when I was 15 and started drinking non-stop. And then there was marijuana. I started doing speed. It was only a party thing. Just took all my worries away, and it was sort of fun, like fun at the start. I was with this fella for 7 years, the kid's dad. He was just like the biggest thing in my life. Like, we did everything together. And we're going to get married. I used to look at wedding dresses, oh, that's cute, that's good, I like that. Didn't happen. Oh well. All the memories we had together, all the music. I don't believe in love anymore. I didn't think I could live without him. I just wanted to die, and I said, well, I'm not going to die and leave my kids here on their own, so I thought, you know, I'll turn to drugs. It changed my whole life. It changed the person I am. Changed everything. Like, I missed my kids' birthdays and everything. That's how bad it makes you get. Sorry. My kids, really looked down on me. They're gorgeous kids. It makes me feel devastated. I hope they get jobs, don't end up in jail, and don't take drugs. I want to be the best mum I can be. I really want to get off ice. It's really hard because everyone around me is on it too. I don't have any friends anymore. I just stick to myself because it's too hard to be around everyone and be off it. Treatment would help. And treatment would help, you know. I had to travel 400 kilometres to get treatment, and I don't have a car. When people like me have down days and feel like they're nothing and nothing's ever going to go right, it doesn't take much to go and get back on it. I really want to get off drugs. I want this to go away. Like, I just don't want to feel like this anymore. I just want to end. I don't know. I need a smoke, I think.
Richard, do you think that sort of changing policy here in Australia starts with changing the conversation? Do you think that we need to be hearing more from drug users themselves in the national conversation?
Well, both those videos were so powerful in explaining what the problem is, and I think anyone who saw those two videos would decide that the current system is not working and that there needs to be a change. And you know, I've had the chance of meeting her earlier, and you know, she's very much wants to get into a clinic. She very much wants to get herself sorted out, but she's unable to do so at the moment.
We should say that she lives 400 kilometres away as well from the nearest long-term residential rehab centre.
I think, you know, just going back to regulating, say, as a test, if you regulated and taxed marijuana as a starter, like they're doing in America now, the amount of money that would be raised would not only pay for clinics all over Australia, but there would be plenty of money left over for education, for health, for other things.
So why has this not been done yet?
I think because politicians are fearful of certain aspects of the media. I mean, like in Britain, they're frightened of the Daily Mail. So, you know, they are. It's just that one newspaper. They're terrified.
Isn't that a terrible indictment that drug reform hasn't happened because of the Daily Mail?
It's obviously very sad and very wrong. But but anyway, hopefully meetings like this will start educating people a little bit, and we can all debate it and learn from each other.
Yeah, and I hope somehow, I don't go to church, but I'm, so proud to be part of an organisation that is hoping to change that underlying fear and make it okay to have that conversation, because it doesn't need to be grounded in fear. We really can just look to the evidence and look to fellow people. And, there was one thing that Chantel said in that video, and she said, my kids look down on me. And at a very basic level, the conversation needs to start that we give each other, basic respect and dignity. And I would like to say to you, Chantel, there is no one in this room that looks down on you.
Khalid, you wanted to add to that?
I mean, there were two, just on the history of prohibition, which started quite at the end of the 19th century and the 20th, but then with the modern era and the UN era, this is something that has been created at the time when there was a lot of hygienism, when it was about individual health and teaching people to stop doing some things so that their health will get better, and including sanitation, etc. What happened throughout the history, the recent history, is two major changes that the system has not taken into account, and those were the globalization and the opening of borders and the movement of the substances that became much easier, but also the HIV/AIDS crisis, which has brought about this enormous epidemic. So basically, the prohibition has remained this strong and is remaining this strong because it was the one thing that everyone agreed upon, even during the Cold War. That was something that both sides agreed that was okay and was good.
So no one agreed on anything during the Cold War except for prohibition. Is this what you're telling me?
One of them. This is one of them. Yeah. And actually, this is how this system became. And when you have 50 years of laws, plus media propaganda, plus this gets into people's system, and everyone started to integrate that stigma and even that self-stigma for people who use drugs.
Absolutely.
So this is a whole system to review from really the beginning, go in with the evidence and with the discussions and with information. No one has it right and no one has it wrong. But obviously, there are lives that are being lost in the middle. Yeah. So
I think it's worth remembering, in the United States of America, they had prohibition of alcohol in the 20s and 30s, or the early 30s, and the prohibition of alcohol resulted in, the Kennedy family getting very rich as the major bootleggers of alcohol. Al Capone raising his ugly head, and the whole underworld being created. a lot of people, going to prison. I mean, all the problems that we currently have with, say, marijuana or other drugs existed because of alcohol prohibition. And when they finally legalized alcohol, there was some casualties, but no more casualties than when it was illegal. But the taxis have been very useful for society. Marijuana is young people's version of alcohol, and yet they get punished for taking it. They end up with criminal records. They're not able to go to America because they've got a criminal record, not able to go to certain other countries because they've got a criminal record. And obviously, there's a way to fix it.
Okay. We are almost out of time. I just want to get each of you to just give us the one takeaway that you hope that people will take away from this panel here today. Richard, what's that for you?
Just to try to persuade politicians to treat drugs as a health problem, not a criminal problem.
Solid.
To not just be interested in it today, because we've got us two famous people on the couch, but to stay interested in it, because, people like Liz and Chantel don't get to just go home like the rest of us at the end of the day. So we need you to be interested in it today and next week and next year. Hang around.
And Khalid?
And I would say that really there is no pathway to harm reduction or to treatment and effective treatment without decriminalization and without ending social stigma and discrimination. I think those are key.
Thank you. Please thank our panel. Richard, Marianne, Khalid. Sorry, just, thank you.
We curtsy.
Yes, I'm just going to invite someone up to give them to you to take a seat back. Thank you. Thank you. I was told to be wary of hecklers, but as far as hecklers go, that was great. Thanks for doing that. If our panelists could just take a seat for a minute, I want to tell you just very, very quickly about something called the Long Walk to Treatment. We heard Chantel's story earlier. Now, Chantel lives 400 kilometres away, you heard me say, from the nearest treatment centre. The Long Walk to Treatment is going to be close to 100 Australians who are actually going to walk 400 kilometres from Dubbo to Parliament House to raise awareness about how difficult it is to access treatment. That's right. I want you to think of it as the world's longest, slowest baton relay race. They're going to be carrying in their hands a baton. That baton is going to be wrapped in a letter from the Uniting Church to the Health Minister. And they are going to get that letter to the Health Minister when it kicks off in exactly 1 week's time. I'm going to tell you how you can all get involved in that in just a moment, but first I'd love to invite Tracy Burton, who's Uniting's Executive Director, to give some final remarks.
What an extraordinary event. It's been so inspiring to see over 2,000 people gather on a rainy Friday to come and help launch Uniting's Fair Treatment campaign this morning. Just extraordinary. I've recently joined Uniting as the new leader there, and one of the things that really drew me to Uniting was our values: compassion, respect, imaginative and bold. And there's no question this morning that we've actually seen those values at work. We're launching a campaign which shows respect and compassion for people who use drugs, and advocating for them in what I think you'd agree is an imaginative and bold way, particularly helped by the people on the stage today. It is my great privilege. I'm going to say some thanks because I think you'll all want to join me in this. It is a great privilege on behalf of Simon and the whole of the Uniting Church, as well as Uniting, to express thanks to the people who've made today possible. We've had our fantastic host, SBS's Jan Fran. Thank you, Jan. Now I've got a few to run through here, so I'm just going to run through and then I'll pause. But Michael, wonderful. Thank you for welcoming us to country and kicking us off in such an appropriate way in this magnificent place, on this magnificent land. Our creative partners, Loud, who've designed the campaign visuals, which I'm sure you'd agree were amazing. Our coalition of 55 partner organisations, so many of whom are here today. Nigel Branson, who's the incredibly talented harm reduction photographer whose work you saw as you entered today. My predecessor, Peter Warland at Uniting, who actually kicked this campaign off. And of course, the whole Uniting team, of who I'm so incredibly proud, particularly calling out our advocacy campaign team and also our social justice forum, who put the campaign together with the church. I'm really grateful too that there are elected members of government here today. They've brought an open mind. Some are already giving great leadership, and as Sir Richard has said, if they can be brave knowing that there's a lot of people who will be behind them, it's that bravery and leadership that indeed we need. And of course, you will want to join me in thanking our three fantastic panellists, Sir Richard Branson, Dr. Khalid Tinasti, and our very own homegrown Dr. Marianne Jauncey. But I think you'll agree with me that there are three more people in this room who we would really like to express a huge thanks to. Three women who have been brave, and we are going to ask Sir Richard to come down and actually present them with some flowers, and maybe a hug if they're lucky. Three women who've been so incredibly brave and generous to share their stories with us this morning, stories which have moved me, and I don't doubt have moved all of you as well. Marianne McConnell, Liz Gow, and Chantal Irwin. And finally, of course, I need to thank all of you. Over 2,000 people here on a rainy Friday, as I said. As part of Uniting Church, Uniting is bringing a loud voice to try and change the systems that trap people in a cycle of disadvantage. And we are so delighted that you've brought your voice to join us as well. I'll certainly be drawing the line on drug policy as soon as the link comes up, and you'll be able to see how you can get on board and sign to draw the line and really help to drive reform across Australia. But thank you so much again for being here today, and a big thanks to our special guests.